Me. Okay. Shalom and welcome to Talmud Talks. Talmud Talks is a program sponsored by the Adult Education, Continuing Education Committee of Congregation Kol Ami in Cherry Hill. And we are continuing with our study of Masechet Brachot. And as you've heard for so many weeks, we are still in Parak 9, the last Parak. God willing, we will finish our study of the parak, and then the whole Masechet, and which would be the whole Masechet by Shavuot, and sometime before or after we'll have some type of way of acknowledging that we have completed this piece of study. Many of you may be aware that the Jewish festival of Purim is quickly approaching. Just to review, we have a number of mitzvot that pertain to Purim. And are you aware of what they are? So you can be truly observant for Purim.
Shalach manot.
Okay, you shalach manot. That's right. So you could give generally of no less than 2 different items to friends and family. Many congregations have shalach manot programs. You give them some money and they'll send them out. Another is providing food for the poor, and that could be done physically, but you could also do it by contributing to a food bank, and the JFCS, Jewish Family and Children's Service here in Cherry Hill, has a food bank. You are to listen to the whole Megillah. That means you have to listen carefully, and even though you're blotting out Haman's name, you still have to be able to hear it. And finally, you are to celebrate and to be in a joyous mood. People often say, Ad shelo yada, until you don't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. And there is a number of ways of trying to understand that. In my opinion, it doesn't mean getting crazy and drunk and silly. It means just being in that joyous mode so that you're happy. If you want a gauge on how much you should drink, you should drink the amount of money that would make it, the amount of alcoholic beverages that would make it difficult for you to figure out the tip in a nice restaurant without a calculator. Another way of doing that is that you can't easily do the gematria for the names Mordechai and Haman. So it doesn't mean to be stupid and crazy. That's me.
Do Reform or observe fast of Esther?
Of course, Reformed people, Jews do everything every other Jew does. Being Reformed doesn't mean you don't do it. Being a Reformed Jew means that you make your own choice as to how, if you will observe it.
I should say instead that I got, but do they give guidance about fast of Esther?
Well, I don't know. You have to ask your Reform rabbi. The one you have two of them on retainer. But the answer is yes. You do. Everyone can if they can fast. Ta'anit Esther is a meaningful fast. All fasting is meaningful, and the nice thing about Ta'anit Esther is that you can get to the position of being unable to do the calculations faster.
Ira, don't take this with any kind of attitude because I don't mean it that way, but that's something for ritual committee. If we had a maybe something on the calendar, it would spark it might spark interest, just like, maybe if we counted the counting of the Omar, would be nice to do as a congregation, but that's for another discussion.
Reform congregations, actually, you see the counting of the Omers become very much more popular, and
Yeah.
the Reform movement has actually guides how to use that period between Pesach and Shavuot as a period of spiritual guidelines. There's spiritual programs that have been produced. Musar, that is Jewish ethical programs that have been produced. Reform movement has produced a commentary on Pirkei Avot, which is read during that period. Ta'anit Esther is more of a personal fast, so that you would notice it if you went to a morning minyan, when they'd be changing the liturgy to include the fasting. We don't at Kol Ami have a daily minyan.
Yeah.
Whether there's a need to do that or not, that's a different issue. That's a ritual issue, and that's nothing that I could say. I usually, if I'm davening in the morning, I do it myself. But again,
that is being discussed. I don't know where it's going to go, but it is being discussed.
Excellent.
No, it requires a core of people, just like adult education requires a core of people for whom it is meaningful. And that's but the thing with it, Reform Judaism, it's not that you do less. There's nothing in Reform Judaism that says you don't do. What Reform Judaism basically focuses is on the autonomy of every Jew to make those decisions on how to live their Jewish life, and that would be particularly their Jewish ritual life, according to their best knowledge and according to their circumstances, or the best knowledge and of Judaism and the evaluation of their own personal circumstance. And that's why we've seen changes in Reform practice over the time, as just the general attitudes of Jews, our relationship to tradition, our understanding of symbolism has changed. So you were never told, and you never had to keep kosher in a Reform synagogue, but there was nothing wrong with a Reform Jew keeping kosher. There was not a great emphasis in Reform life, let's say, on placing tefillin or wearing a talit for a long time, but within the last 20 years, you can see that has changed as well. So there's an internal dynamic and also a communal dynamic. So if you ask me what Reform Jews in general do, that gets harder. And then if you ask the question, what do Reform Jews who are involved in their synagogue do? That's also gets a little harder. However, none of those ethical mitzvot are, how I say it, you don't get out of. You can't make your own personal decision whether you want to be honest or not. You can't make your own personal decision whether you want to steal or not. Shoplifting is not under the same category as keeping kosher. You got that clear. We're, as Reform Jews, we try to be orthodox in those more ethical mitzvot. And that's probably why something like Tikkun Olam becomes a very important part of Reform practice. Wow. Good question. Just because you want to know if you can get out of fasting with Esther.
No, it was just curious. I didn't know a good way to phrase it because we were going through all the different.
Yes, the Tanit Esther is a good thing. There'll be lots of celebrations. I hope you have a wonderful Purim and hope you get the Hamantashen that you like. I personally
Is there such a thing, the Hamantashen, that I wouldn't like?
I don't know. I have my favorites. I'm a poppy seed, mun, Hamantashen guy, and so long as I don't have dentures, I'm going to eat poppy seeds. But other people have their own favorites. Okay, let's get into our text. Any questions from last week? Good. So let me see if I can figure out where we were. Here's where we're going to start. So can you see the shared screen?
No,
They
No.
started now.
Yeah.
It should say start here March
Very good.
11th.
Yes.
So if you go back, remember we started looking a little bit about, learning a little bit about astronomy, at least astronomy as they understood it. And as you may remember, we talked a little bit about the structure of the universe in this period, our understanding of it, which was a geocentric universe in which the planets and sun, moon, and stars circulated around the Earth in distinct spheres. Each sphere was understood as a different heaven until you got to the top sphere, which is the sphere of the stars. And beyond that would be the eternity in which the divine dwells. There was a sense that the stars and planets represented some type of angelic presence. They had, they were creations of God, but that they could influence the ways that we learned about the world, not only in terms of the physical world, but things that we might put in the category of astrology. So measuring the stars, astronomy and astrology, the words of the stars were very, very closely entwined. And that's actually the case really up until the early modern period. There are still people who study astrology, not necessarily the what's your sign pickup line in a bar or astrology and you check your future for the day in the newspaper, but a sense that as the stars and planets exert some type of energy force on all of creation, how those energies come together to affect you at any one moment. I'm not selling astrology, please, but it's not as wacky as you might think it is. There is a logical basis, and for this period, it was scientific. You understand? So this is their science. So here we have some more stuff on stars. Does anyone here do stargazing? Is anyone here an astronomer? I don't know, sort of an amateur astronomer? Has anyone here had the experience of looking at the heavens at night, far away from all our light pollution? Have you ever had that?
I was lucky enough to see the aurora borealis,
oh,
Yes.
which is very cool. I was in upstate New York. I graduated at Albany, and they had great lands in the Adirondacks, and we were way up in the mountains and saw this incredible show. And it was the next day we came down, and in the newspaper it was a big headline. You could see the aurora borealis.
wow.
So,
Anyone else have?
obviously, if it's in print, I believe it.
Has anyone else had the opportunity to see the sky not affected by all our light pollution?
Actually, yes. When I was in Berlin last December, there are very few lights if you're not near a major part of the city. And I happen to have one of these apps that sort of outline once you put it in the right place. And you really get a good vision if you're not near a lot of lights. And this was in Berlin itself.
Wow.
No lights.
Being in the Hayden Planetarium, it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's sort of like a, well, if you ever have the opportunity, let's say to go out maybe to the west in the national park, one of the large state parks or forests, or even sometimes to be out in the ocean if there isn't a lot of light on their ship, or any time that you can see the sky without light, it is really powerful. It is amazing to see all the stars, to see the Milky Way, and to watch, the slow movement, if you're just willing to put yourself down on the ground or on a lounge chair and watch. Our ancestors lived in a world where they could see everything. I mean, that which was visible to their eyes was that full nightly show. And things that we can't see, all those duller stars, were still much brighter. And we also know that our eyes adapt to the darkness. So when we're working where we have, even here our eyes adapt, but we have street lights and headlights, so it never gets that sharp. But if it's really, really dark and you wait 10, 15 minutes, things become much more acute. You can see these things. So try to keep that in mind. When they looked up to heaven, they saw things in ways that were far clearer than the way we can see it today. So next time you're in Israel, go out to the Negev and go to some type of little, sort of not fancy place and just look at the stars. Or Arizona or Maine or any place else. So keep that in mind. So let's start reading at number 12. Can I have a reader?
I'll read.
Yeah.
On the subject of stars, the Gemara notes that Shmuel raised a contradiction between the implications of two verses with regard to constellations. On the one hand, it is written, who makes Ursa Major, Orion, and Pleiades?
Pleiades.
What is it?
The Pleiades, which is a cluster of
Pleiades.
7 to 9 stars that are just in front of Orion. So if you have Orion and on his right hand, you have all these little stars. So you know us, the Big Bear, which we know is the Big Dipper. That's the easiest part to see. Casil is Orion, and that's the 4 blocks with the stars going up in the middle. The big red star is Betelgeuse, also of the movie fame, and then the Pleiades. So we have one thing, we have the order, Ursa Major, Orion, and the Pleiades. And what's the next verse?
And on the other hand, it is written, he who makes Pleiades and Orion, Pleiades precedes Orion.
So you know the problem, Julie. What's the problem?
Different order.
It's an order problem. Why does Scripture say Orion and Pleiades in one place and then Pleiades and Orion in another? So, how is Shmuel going to solve this? Judy, I'll let you answer.
Oh, should I? Oh,
yeah.
So how is
you can
this
cheat.
reconciled? The Gemara replies, were it not for Orion's heat, the universe could not exist because of the cold of Pleiades. And conversely, were it not for the cold of Pleiades, the universe could not exist because of the heat of Orion.
Okay. So we have the heat of Orion and the cold of the Pleiades. What's going on here? What image of the universe do you have? What is the contrast?
Well, it's in how far away from the earth.
Okay. So what's special? So were it not il male chamat shel kasil lo nitkayem olam mipnei zina shel kima. Were it not for Orion's heat, the universe could not exist because of the cold of the Pleiades. So we have a contrast here between Chama, that is heat, and this called Zina, which is cold. So if it weren't for Orion's heat, the universe, the coldness of the Pleiades would make it unable for the universe to stand. And on the other hand, if it weren't for the coldness of the Pleiades, the universe would not exist because of the heat of Orion. So what makes the universe exist?
Balance.
Balance. So here we have a balance between heat, hot and cold. So the universe exists because there's a Goldilocks spot between hot and cold. You remember Goldilocks? She goes and eats the porridge, and one is too hot, the other is too cold, and this one is just right. So there's a balance and a special Goldilocks spot. So what does this tell us about the way they conceived of the universe? Not necessarily the details that Orion is hot and the Pleiades are cold, but how what makes our universe stay together?
A balance between
Yes.
everything.
Yes. Things need to remain in balance. So with balance, you get a sense of stability. Here we're talking about physical energies, but we also have balance in other parts of Jewish, of their understanding. Our moral universe, there's a balance between Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov, the evil inclination and the good inclination. There's a balance between genders. Men and women have to balance each other. Ezra Kenegdo. So their world is generally seen here as a balance. If you were going to think of a symbol that we know today that actually comes from East Asia to describe balance, what is that symbol?
Yin and yang.
Yeah, which is also a balance thing. So
There's a little spot of the opposite in each.
That's right. Yeah. It is a little bit, but the goal is to maintain balance. And when you achieve balance, the universe can be established, and you get something known as shalom. So
I would also mention the scales of justice is supposed to balance.
That's right. That's another justice's balance. You have the balance between din, judgment, and rachamim, compassion. Thank you very much. That was really, so there's, when you think about how Rabbinic Judaism thinks about the world, often it thinks about the world in terms of maintaining a balance, maintaining a stability. Is it easy to maintain balance?
Not at all.
Well, it's a yes and no.
Mm.
How do you maintain your balance throughout your life?
You can avoid extremes.
You avoid extremes. Even physical balance, we have to practice, right?
Mhm.
What happens to your body when it gets out of balance?
They usually fall down.
That's right. Think about their medical understanding, the Greek medical understanding, in which you had to have a balance between four elemental forces, between the four humors. They had to be in balance. You were ill when they fell out of balance. So balance is a really important concept for the way our ancestors, our sages, looked at the world. when you get mystically, there's even a sense of we need to maintain a balance within God. So in later periods, people talk about God's name, 4 letters, Yud He and Vav He, having to be 2 parts that have to remain in balance with each other. Mystically, those are seen as, can be seen as male and female properties that need to be held together. If you look at the image of the Kabbalistic, and this is later material than where we are, this is hundreds of years later, you have a sense of the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is sort of a balance. So, balanced
We also
life.
have the Jewish star.
The Jewish star is an integrating thing. Yes, there are all
It's a
sorts.
6. Yeah.
You can, once you start looking for it, you can see it. 10 commandments, 5 on each side. The menorah, 3, 3 with 1 in the center. So just as a way of thinking about how Jews may picture the world, or traditionally have pictured the world, this idea of balance is really pretty deep. Okay, now we're going to go on with some more astronomy. Who would like to read number 13?
I can read.
I can.
Oh, okay. Please.
Rachel.
Me or Jerry?
Rachel.
Okay.
Rachel.
And we
Rachel.
thank you. And we learned a tradition that if the tail of the constellation Scorpio did not rest in the river of fire, Daniel's 7:10, perhaps the Milky Way, anyone stung by a scorpion would not survive. And that is what the All-Merciful said to Job of the relationship between heat and cold among the stars. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loosen the bands of Orion? God alternates intensifying the power of different constellations in order to raise or lower the temperature.
Okay, so this gives us an understanding of how global warming works. No, it doesn't. But it gives another idea of dealing with this issue of Job. This passage from Job 38, is a really interesting passage. This is part of the theophany, the revelation of God's self to Job, in which God says, has 2 basic themes. One, that Job, you should know your friends are wrong in thinking they can explain what's happening in terms of a simple calculus of sin and punishment. That's wrong. And the other is, in no way can you, Job, understand what's going on. And in that way, you're right. But beyond that, the ways of the universe and the ways of God are beyond human understanding. So one of the questions that God presents to Job is, can you do this? If you want to visualize it, you may have seen the animated Aladdin.
I was just thinking of that.
Really? So you can tell us the
Well, Robin Williams, of course, the late and great, he's doing all sorts of miracles and asking young Aladdin, can you do this? Can you do that? And exactly what I was thinking.
Yes. So when you get to Job and reading it, it's really down and up. Keep that in mind, Mark. Just on the side, Job is only the patient sufferer in the introductory part of the book. Once you get into the depth of the book, Job is a serious dialogue partner, first with his opponent, with his quote friends, and then with God. He's willing to challenge God, and Job's image there is not one who humbly accepts what God gives, but one who remains in relationship to God, even when things are going poorly and when he thinks that life is treating him unfairly. So Job is not one who humbly accepts what God has dealt to him, but is one who is saying, no matter what, I'm going to keep in relationship, and I'll ask you the tough questions, even though I might not get the answers. So the faith of Job is to be in relationship, not just to suffer. Okay, so here's the thing. So now with regard to the Pleiades.
With regard to the Pleiades, the Gemara asks, what is Pleiades, Kema?
Yeah.
Why is that called by that name? Shmuel said, because it is approximately 100 stars.
Kamea. So you may know the Hebrew word. Mea is 100, so
Mea.
Kima is like Kamea. Okay.
As that is the number of stars in that constellation. Some say that they are concentrated and some say they are dispersed. Okay, that's contradictory.
Well, again, you're always looking at it through Uranus. They don't have telescopes. They're looking at it and they see a cluster of stars. Can't really count them. It seems like a lot. So I think that's what it's saying. So they could also, sometimes you can visualize some of the star clusters that we now think about as star clusters, or, sort of little galaxies. They sort of seem like a big fuzzy thing. So, just a lot of stars in the Pleiades. There seem to be 7 or 9 that you can pick out easily. So now we're going to go on some more about what their world is. So now the nice thing about this is that the universe, the stars, the heavens look pretty much the same now as they did then. If we go over enough time, we will know that the stars will change position because they're always moving. But within human history, we haven't been recording history long enough to have any significant change. So maybe if you were sort of walking around with Lucy a couple million years ago and you saw the stars would look different. But today it's pretty much the same. So would someone like to read?
Okay, with regard to the, whoops, what's that? I didn't hear that. Okay. With regard to the verse, who makes Ursa Major, Orion, and Pleiades, Job 9:9, the Gemara asks, what is Ursa Major? Ash. Rav Yehuda said, it is the star called Yota. This name was unfamiliar as well, so Gemara asks, what is Yota versus Yoda? There is disagreement. Some say that Yota is the group of stars comprising the tail of Aries, while others say that Yota belongs to the head of Taurus. The Gemara concludes, and it stands to reason in accordance with the opinion of the one who said that Yota is the group of stars comprising the tail of Aries, as it is written, or can you guide Ursa Major with her sons? That's Job 38:32. Apparently it was incomplete and the tail appears.
Okay. Well, I don't know much more to get out of this except that they don't know everything about their science and they need their experts and have to figure it out. Okay, we'll continue talking about this stuff. Please continue reading.
And as if it was appended onto it, the Gemara explains, and the fact that Ursa Major follows Pleiades, it is as if Ursa Major is saying to Pleiades, give me back my children, my 2 stars. As it is related, when the Holy One, blessed be he, sought to bring a flood into the world, he took 2 stars from Pleiades and brought the flood upon the world. And afterward, when he wished to fill the void, he took 2 stars from Ursa Major and filled the void with them. Consequently, the constellation of Ursa Major attempts to persuade Pleiades, seeking to get its stars back.
Okay, I can see that we're all really impressed on this, but think about how the flood the story took place. God opens the floodgates of heaven. So that's a problem. How do you do that? So you have to, Shemaim, maybe Shemaim, there's water under the earth. It was sort of floating in an earlier session. So how do you have to do that? Well, you have to take out the cork that's holding up the upper waters so they can pour out. So the stars here are sort of like the cork. Pop them out. It starts filling the world. And when you have to stop it, you have to plug them in again. Makes perfect sense.
But there were different stars.
There were
first
different
were from-
stars.
Yes.
Yeah,
Ursa
so,
Major.
oops, what does God do with these stars? Well, Ursa Major wants the stars back. And we have to continue. So, it was a good question. Why different stars? Who asked that question? Who mentioned that?
I did.
Okay, well, thank you. Because now you can see the Gemara had the same issue.
The
Number
Gemara
2.
asks, and return it, why did the Holy One, blessed be he, not restore the original 2 stars to the Pleiades? The Gemara answers, a pit cannot be filled by its own earth. When a pit is excavated, the earth that was excavated from it is insufficient to fill it.
Remember that? Do you ever have that problem? You dig a hole and put a plant in, and then you fill it up with dirt, and you still have dirt left over, or you don't have enough dirt to fill it up, and you have to get extra dirt.
Alternatively, one could say that a prosecutor cannot become an advocate. Since these stars caused the flood, it is not appropriate that they facilitate the end of the flood.
Okay. Ein kategor naaser sanegor. Okay, that kategor is the prosecutor. Sanegor is the advocate. And those are words that actually come from Greek.
So you can't change sides.
No. If you've been you really can't be trusted if you're the prosecutor then to become an advocate, particularly if it's the same case. You've been prosecuting this case and then you turn around and then start supporting it. You don't get a lot of credibility. Okay, so what we see here playing with these things is they're also playing with ideas. The pit cannot be filled from its own earth is interesting, but the idea is that the kategor cannot become the sanegor, the prosecutor cannot become the advocate. That's moving from the scientific to the human ethical. And finally, we have this little section.
The Gemara argues, then God should have created 2 other new stars for Pleiades. The Gemara responds, there is nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes 1:9.
Okay, that's a standard line from Ecclesiastes, right? Kohelet, ein kol chadash tachat hashemesh. It's nothing really changes. I'm not sure that Ecclesiastes, Kohelet was talking about the stars, but there is this idea that nothing changes, and the sense of the stability of the universe is part of ancient science.
Rav Nachman said, in the future, the Holy One, blessed be he, will restore those same stars to Ursa Major as it is stated, or can you guide Ursa Major with her sons? Which is interpreted homiletically as in the sense of consolation, apparently due to the restoration of those stars.
Yeah, so the word is tanchem. Nachama, you may know, is consolation. So tanchuma is a type of tanchumim. Here they are talking about Aish will be consoled because of her children. And that has to happen in the future. So I hope you're happy with now your little introduction to astrology. Our next stop will be meteorology and geography. So, going back to my share. And now, we're going to talk about earthquakes and thunder. So, we have a funny word, zivaot, which is understood here to mean earthquakes. And we read already in the Mishnah that over an earthquake, we recite the blessing, Baruch shechocho gvurato malei olam. So just think about it. You've just gone through an earthquake. You're scared to death. You're supposed to talk. You're supposed to recite his blessing, and it's basically, "Oh my God, what just happened? Shechocho gvurato malei olam." God's power and strength and power fills the world. I asked before if anyone experienced the sky. Has anyone been through an earthquake?
Yeah, I lived in California for several years.
Yeah.
I slept through one.
Really?
It was only 4.8, but my wife was surprised.
That you slept through it.
Mhm.
So even at a slight one, when you see the earth, feel the earth shaking, we had one maybe about 10 years ago here. And I remember I was still working at Lionsgate, and we were doing a program in the social hall. We could really feel the earth shake. I told the people not to worry. This is frame construction, so it should hold up. But even at that, the sense of the earth moving was, very, very frightening. In the land of Israel, it's part of the Syrian African Rift Valley. And that explains why you have the Sea of the Galilee and the Rift going down to the Jordan. And it goes all the way down into Africa and all the way up. And it's one of the places where the plates come together. And there are lots of earthquakes in the Mideast. And it's still quite dangerous. There have been earthquakes in Syria, earthquakes in Turkey. So it was something that they could experience, and it's something that they really couldn't explain.
In the middle of the desert in California, I'm forgetting exactly where because I had visited it. Kaiser Permanente erected a data center that was on stilts, on shocks, where the walls were on shocks, and the bottom of the bottom floor was actually the ground, and it was because of the earthquakes.
So some places have good, prepared for earthquakes, have building codes and enforce them. Other places have building codes and they don't enforce them. We know about that recent earthquake, I guess about 5 years ago in Turkey, where contractors have put up lots of buildings and ignored the codes, and there was just terrible destruction.
As in Mexico City recently.
Yeah. Hopefully in Israel, they've been enforcing the building codes. So we have this word zivaot. I looked up zivaot, so I know it means earthquake. But the Gemara, the first thing is we have in the Mishnah, al hatzivaot. So the guys living in Babylon, they say, like, what are these zivaot? My zivaot. They need to know what it is. So Rav Katina says it's an earthquake. You like that? Trust him. That's what he believed. Who's Rav Kahina? So you get an idea of he was a second generation Amora. He lived in Babylon, and taught many people, consider, particularly Rav Kisa. So, second generation Amora. And here's a little story about him and a necromancer. Do you know what a necromancer is? It's not a popular profession these days. If we break it up, what do you think the word?
So you bring back the dead.
That's right. You're someone who can talk to the dead or have
right.
communication to the dead. It's probably somewhat useful. I don't know anyone who does this anymore. Rav Katina. So let's talk about, would someone like to read this Ma'isa about Rav Katina?
I'll read.
Okay, please.
The Gemara relates, Rav Katina was once walking along the road when he came to the entrance of the house of a necromancer, and an earthquake rumbled. He said, does this necromancer know what is this earthquake? The necromancer raised his voice and said, Katina, Katina, why would I not know?
Okay, let's stop here. What could a necromancer do? What should a necromancer be able to help you with?
Talking to the dead.
Talking to the dead and getting information about the world. So there's something about you talk to the dead, maybe to reconcile old conflicts, but also to know what's happening because they're living out of time. Remember when the wise woman of Endor called up Shmuel when Shaul was at the end, and Shmuel said, A, why'd you bother me? I was comfortable. And two, it's not going to go good for you tomorrow in the battle. So you have two things. You can talk about the past, relate those things, or get some of the future. So Katina said, did you know that this was going to happen? And the necromancer said, oh, what do you think? Of course not. Why wouldn't I not know? And, it sounds like Jews talking already. There's the way the conversation. Let's continue, though. Certainly,
this earthquake occurred because when the Blessed Holy One remembers his children who are suffering among the nations of the world, he sheds 2 tears into the great sea. The sound of their reverberation is heard from one end of the earth to the other, and that is an earthquake.
Okay. So, is this a necromancer or a Jewish guy?
No.
Why would you say no?
Because unless he's a prophet or one of the real special people reserved to have a relationship with God, it's beyond our ability, I think, and could actually be a little pompous to think that you talk to the dead. Although I know a few people who think they can, but that's besides the point.
Okay. Good. Keep that last point. People even today who think that they can communicate with the dead.
Absolutely.
Good. So surely if people are doing it today, when you had a world in which there was a sense that the dead were still real and present, there were people able to do this. The fact that he knows Katina pretty intimately, he passes his house and he says, the necromancer knows Katina. So he says, Katina, why wouldn't I know this? And then he provides an explanation. And how does he describe it? It says, B'shaha shehakadosh baruch hu. That's a very Jewish way of describing God. Zocher et banav. Remember his children. Again, that's sort of like a connection. Shesiruim betza'ar ben umot ha'olam. Who have this, tsa'ar. They are suffering among the nations. And why would a non-Jew really be concerned about God being concerned about Israel's suffering, unless this is really a big-hearted, generous necromancer? And then what happens? You have God shedding tears, a very physical image of God, the tears hitting the earth, the sea, and the divine tears, so they will shake it. So, what does an earthquake represent to the necromancer? What does it say about God's connection to the earth and connection with Israel?
God expresses his emotions through nature.
Yes. Yeah. And there's an intimacy between God and God's people. That is Israel.
God's compassionate.
God is compassionate. God is sharing. God is with us in suffering.
And he's empathetic because he's not indifferent to their suffering. That's why he's crying.
Yeah. So it's an interesting understanding of God.
Mhm.
So this necromancer, could have been an accountant, could have been something else. He went to necromancy school, got his degree, and now he does this. But he has, there's really a sense here of that there's a Jewish idea of the world. He's a Jewish guy. He is connecting to God. He is connecting with Yisrael, and he has this very deep spiritual explanation. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm saying that this is how he's understanding and putting it in terms that talk about how God relates to the world. So what does Rav Katina say?
Rav Katina said, the necromancer is a liar and his statements are lies. If so, it would necessitate an earthquake followed by another earthquake, one for each tier.
Okay, so yeah, you understand that. One hit, you get one earthquake and another. But they could have hit simultaneously or so close you wouldn't tell. So the Gemara continues.
The Gemara remarks, that is not so, as it indeed causes an earthquake followed by another earthquake. And the fact that...
So what do we know about earthquakes? We have
aftershocks.
Yeah, okay. So let's continue, please.
And the fact that Rav Katina did not admit that the necromancer was correct was so that everyone would not mistakenly follow him.
Okay, so why is Rav Katina disagreeing with the necromancer?
So he doesn't have credibility.
That's right. So why shouldn't a necromancer have credibility?
It's almost like idolatry, perhaps, to avoid idolatry.
To avoid idolatry, to avoid, no, we're not supposed to inquire from the dead. That's Torah. That's not a legitimate way of learning about the future, even in Torah, from Torah. So yes, it does work, or people thought it might work, but it's not a Jewish way of doing it. So even though his science was correct, what he does is incorrect. So Rav Katina might even agree with the necromancer about the theology. What he doesn't agree with, according to the Gemara, is that what the necromancer does is a right thing. Okay, here's some more science. Number 6. May I have another reader?
I'll read.
Okay.
Rev Katina also stated his own explanation for the earthquake. Because God claps his hands together in anger, as it is stated, I will also smite my hands together, and I will satisfy my fury. I, the Lord, have spoken it.
Okay, that's Ezekiel. And what's the image here? How does an earthquake happen?
Clapping his hands.
Okay, so we have a real physical image of God here. God is crying. God is it has hands that could clap. Where do we Where do we get this idea of such an anthropomorphic vision of God?
I mean, all these things are destructive. So, that's why it's not like, if God was really sad, he would put up a rainbow or something, not cause these things that are damaging.
That could be, sure.
So this makes more sense that God's angry.
God's angry, God's upset. It's sort of like the blessing. May God hold you in the palm of your hand and clap with his hand and clap with joy. But this is a very anthropomorphic, human formed image of God. Where does it come from?
Well, I want to say the Torah, where Moses just sees God's back.
Okay, you see God seeing back. Other places in Torah, where in Scripture, where you may get a sense that God is sort of resembles human beings in a physical sense.
Giving the law, he was angry at Moses when he crashed the.
So that's God having human emotions.
All right.
But what about God having human characteristics? That God has eyes that can shed tears, God has hands that can clap. I mean, obviously these are biblical quotes. Is this an image of God that any of us hold today? God is like us, just bigger.
I'm thinking that giving God human characteristics would be to push against the characteristics of gods in other cultures, because in other cultures the gods were animals. There were all sorts of things, and maybe it was just to try to move away and because they needed something.
Yeah, could be that. We also have that basic thing that God creates us in the divine image. So we often understand that in terms of emotional, intellectual, moral images, but you could take it physically. There is a form of Jewish mysticism in this period that is called a shi'ur koma, that is measuring the size of God and talking about, let's say, God's parts in sort of what we would call astronomical terms. So many hundreds of thousands of Persian miles being the size of God's toe. So it may be this idea of just God is so big and we can imagine it in just blowing up human proportions. So some more. Now we're going to Rabbi Natan, and it's not a physical thing, but what is it? We have God. Someone like to continue reading? Rabbi Natan says. Do you see it in the middle?
Rabbi Natan says the earthquake is called. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. Rabbi Natan says the earthquake is caused because God sighs over the dire straits in which Israel finds itself. As it is stated, thus shall my anger spend itself, and I will satisfy my fury upon them, and I will be eased. And they will know that I am the Lord, that I, the Lord, have spoken with my zeal when I spend my fury upon them.
Please continue.
And the rabbi says, an earthquake is caused when God kicks the firmament, causing a rumbling, as it is stated, the Lord roars from on high, from his holy dwelling, he makes his voice heard. He roars mightily over his dwelling place. He cries out like those who tread grapes against all the inhabitants of the earth. Continue?
Yes.
Rev Ahabar Yaakov. Ahabar Yaakov
Yes.
said, an earthquake is caused when God forces his feet beneath the throne of glory and the world quakes. As it is stated, the heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool.
Okay, so what do we have in common with all these explanations? First, who causes earthquakes?
God, obviously.
Yeah, so that in some way God causes these earthquakes. And since God causes these earthquakes, we have to say the blessing upon experience an earthquake, which we had way in the beginning. Baruch shechocho gvurato malei olam. Blessed is the one whose strength and power fills the world. So in some way, all these explanations are trying to say why we say that blessing, that earthquakes are an expression of God's strength and power. So we have the spiritual understanding that God is behind the earthquakes, and lots of this discussion was trying to maybe reify it, make it real, provide some type of imagery to help us understand it, or perhaps a literal, fairly literal graphic understanding of God as a big human being, just bigger and bigger and greater than all of us. So we have God sighing, God crying, God just stretching out God's legs on the throne. I really like that one. When God sort of stretches out and pushes on the footstool, which is the earth, we get moved and we are shaken. So think about that next time you go back on your reclining chair and do that. But we have this blessing that says that the earthquake is a symbol of divine power and strength. And then we have this Gemara discussion trying to provide some type of image that we can hold to explain it. And in doing this, we have a couple of images of God, one of an image of God of being connected with the sufferings of the Jewish people. And we also have just a connection. This is like what God does. That's our last one. God's going to stretch out every so often, and we're going to have an earthquake. So some of it may be a deliberate sense of what God is doing. And the other is, this is just how the world works. There are earthquakes. So I think we have to stop here. Before we go on, we can continue another understanding of this God's power in nature when we look at lightning and thunder next week. But does anyone have any final thoughts? Let me just here.
I just wanted to ask, a few weeks ago, we had talked about maybe the adult education group looking into doing a book study, like one of the books. I didn't know if anything had come from that.
I wouldn't know if anything came from that. I'd be willing to do any biblical or post-biblical Jewish book in a lengthened study, whether it's a Jewish, something from the Bible, or later a Mussar classic, and do it over 4 to 8 week period. You have a volunteer teacher. So just there's something people want to study. I'm game.
I mean, we do have an opportunity when you go on the calendar website, and we do have what's called Spice Up Your Judaism, and it starts at 10:30 after Torah study on Saturday morning, and Carl Vinier, one of our congregants, did discuss the book of Job. I mean, we didn't do the entire, it wasn't a study in depth. And I know that Lewis had done a 3 or 5 part on
we did Daniel a number of years ago.
On the book of Daniel, yeah. And So we do have opportunity. I'm not saying that that should be the
Yeah,
only
and
thing.
I have done
but-
the Torah study on Saturday and a couple of spice ups, but I was thinking something more in one of the
Right.
books of the Bible more in
I don't
depth.
mean for it
Well,
to be
Okay.
like your,
you're also
you know.
welcome to come to the adult education meeting, which is on the, is it the third or
Third
fourth
Thursday.
The third,
Third every month, and we do discuss things like that. But a lot of the schedules, they're taken care of. I mean, this is something that will be kept in mind as we schedule for next year.
Yeah, that would be fine. And again, I'd be willing to teach a biblical
Oh,
book.
that'd
It
be
could
great.
Or again, a post-biblical book, just, for a limited time, not like this, which is sort of, so
Yeah.
long as we're on this earth, we can continue doing this type of stuff. But,
Yes.
and you can drop in and drop out, but if people want to do something that's much more discreet, 4 to 6 sessions on any of the books. Proverbs I like Psalms, any of the prophetic books, and also post-biblical material as well. And during the summer, I'm planning on working on probably one of the ethical treatises from the Talmud. Last summer we did animal stories, fables.
Yeah,
Well, I'll
fables.
probably think
Yeah.
something else. But here today, just to summarize, we had a discussion of the ways our sages looked at the universe. I think the couple takeaways is that balance is a really important concept of the way they understand how creation exists. Things exist in balance. And the example was the heat of the Orion and the chill of the Pleiades. They needed to be kept together. And then a sense that God is control, that he can play with these things to cause subtle changes in our experience. We also had a sense that, natural forces express God's power, and the sages are trying to figure out what that means. And they range from the fact that it's a way of God's expressing sympathy with the Jewish people, and then with creation in general, to the idea that this is just how it's set up. God sits down, puts his feet on the footstool, and God's feet are heavy, so the footstool is going to move. So there is again, this is coming more in the idea of Midrash Agadah. This is talking about how to think about the world and how to think about the divine and divine interaction with the world. Don't worry, coming to the future, we'll get back to halacha. Don't worry about that. But for the rest of these barachot, it's going to be talking mostly about these more spiritual and philosophic ideas. I want to wish everyone all the best. You should have a Chag Sameach, a very
Thank you.
happy Purim. Take out your groggers and go listen to the Purim spiel someplace nearby.
Kol Ami.
Is a very good place.
Thank
Kol
you.
It's a very
Ami
good place.
on Thursday night
Okay, bye-bye,
at
everyone.
7.
Bye.
See you.